accommodations for school attendants for children with disabilities and medical marijuana has been recommended. So we've had a couple of renditions of this, and that's a new amendment. Is that correct?
Right. There is a new amendment
All right.
from Representative Sanderson.
Do I see Representative Sanderson? Did she just get here? Okay. Hey, how would you join us up here, Representative?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Representative, before we get into your amendment, you and I just talked a little bit out in the hall, and last Friday I was kind of nosing around because in your committee, Health and Human Services, you were working a bill with medical marijuana in hospitals, and I was talking with some of the folks outside in the hallways that from the hospitals that were looking at ways to well, the first thing is I think they were in opposition to it for a lot of reasons, but I had talked with them some about 3 items that they had concerns with, and I thought I should share with you this for discussion purposes. They were looking at narrowing the scope of, I think theirs was on childhood seizure disorders, because that mirrored somewhat of a lot of the people we'd seen here. They also looked for a trigger that if something were to come down from the feds, that much like I think when so there would be a trigger that would repeal it if there was some pushback from the feds. And then lastly, there was some indemnity for their nurses or their personnel, or be like in our case might be school personnel. So that was kind of an interesting, because frankly I was wondering how those folks were going to deal with that. But could you recount a little bit of I didn't sit on for all that testimony, but I was, like I said, I was curious, so I stopped by. But would you just sort of recount what happened and where your thoughts are over in your committee and where you might go with that?
Well, it would be I think where we may end up going is very much what we've discussed in this committee in regards to application, who's bringing, who's storing it, and certainly not require the hospitals to store it, make it very similar to what we talked about here. Whoever your caregiver, if it's a child, parent, carry in, carry out, and you administer, kind of thing when you're hospitalized. I don't think requiring the hospital to store and administer is probably the most prudent thing to do, any more than like the original version of this bill, having school nurses and schools have to store and administer was prudent either. As far as the trigger piece, I mean, and with them limiting the conditions, I think that's counterproductive to why this individual is probably in the hospital. Because if you limit it to one, if a child is maybe a cancer patient or has another condition that 2 physicians in consultation have recommended the use of this for, then it's counterproductive to take that away from a child when they're in the hospital for maybe an exacerbation of that condition. And I think I would probably feel pretty much the same regarding schools too. As far as a trigger, that's possible, but I also raised this concern regarding a trigger with the sponsor of the hospital bill, Senator Brakey. And if there's a trigger in there, the federal level watches these bills very closely and reads the language in them and reads what's passed. In states that have legalized marijuana for medical purposes, for medical use, they've really just sat back and let the states regulate them, let the states do that. But if too many people start putting triggers in, and if anything changes down in Washington, and right now the temperature seems to be, we're going to back off the medical marijuana piece, we're just going to leave them alone. But if anything ever flared up, I would worry that would give them a tool to just say, okay, we're starting to see this happen too much and we just don't like it. Not whether it's useful, not whether it's working, or not whether there's an actual real reason why it shouldn't be happening, but we just don't like it. that may give them the tool to stop something and really cause some difficulties for children who may be utilizing them. But that, of course, I would leave up to the committee's discretion. But as far as the conditions,
That's your call. I was just listening in and thought maybe we try to look for anywhere, anyhow, a way to get through some of these bills. So.
well, I do know that there is another hospital in the country that is allowing the use of it. And, to my knowledge, they have not had any problem.
Okay, committee, Representative Stearns, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Representative Sanderson.
Representative Stearns, I remember your name.
Thank you. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm gonna take it as good. Along those same lines, there's been a story bubbling around about the VA hospitals that I've heard on the radio, and I know that you have a real good background there. What's the issue there? Because I look at all of these, I think I'm kind of chasing the same animal that Senator Langley's chasing. The hospitals, any institutions are facing this same difficult path, if you will, and where are they with that?
I don't think they're embracing it. I know on one particular unit, it's we're not touching it, but we're not going to do anything. Very similar to the carry in, carry out being proposed by the caregiver. You administer, you bring it in, you take it out. We're not going to handle it, but we're certainly not going to stop you from using it. That we're primarily proposing for children in school.
Thanks.
Okay. Senator Millett.
Mr. Chair, so we have been walking down a very long, windy road on this bill. And I'm feeling good about where we are right now with this latest version of the amendment. I think it's sufficiently narrow. It's very clear about the adults that are going to be required to administer, to carry in, carry out, that it's not smoked. So I think we're being as clear as possible that this is for medical purposes only and is going to be in a very controlled fashion. And I really hope that as a committee we can get behind this bill and help these kids out.
President Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Sanderson, it's good to see you without your thing on the hand.
Yeah.
That's terrific. I had a long talk with Ms. Bellows earlier this afternoon after I had a chance to review this, and it does deal with a lot of the, I think, sort of a little bit of heartburn that some of the members were having before. And I really like Senator Mullet, thank you.
I answered a hey.
Yes, it's called a brain freeze or a senior moment or whatever. Anyhow, I believe that this basically resolves a lot of the issues. It removes the issues around school involvement. Basically, it's sort of an open door policy. You come in, give it, and you leave. And that basically is it. So I would certainly hope we could get behind this thing.
President Daughtry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo the same comments that Representative Farnsworth said, and was wondering if you're ready for a motion. I move that LD 557 ought to pass as amended with the amendment in front of us.
Second. Okay, discussion. Mr. Neal.
I just had just a couple notes about the amendment that has been provided today, differences from the last time you saw it. Just to note that the last section about storage in the school has been removed completely. The committee, I believe last time was behind that. There's also just an addition of the word in the second line under B1 here. The person is a parent, guardian, or designated caregiver as defined by Title 22, Section 2423A, sub 1E, who is authorized to possess and administer marijuana for medical use. That was just think in response to the committee's concerns about the parent actually being the one who's authorized to possess marijuana. And then there's also language including in the form of an oil, a pill, a suppository, edible marijuana, a tincture, or topical salve. The only note that I had there, it's including, so it's permissive and it's not an exhaustive list of all the potential future forms of marijuana that may come into existence. But the committee had discussed edible marijuana, and I just wanted to point that out, that is included here. And then finally, or second to last actually, is to a minor child who is a student at the school. I just wanted to point that out also because at the public hearing there was some testimony about parents who may be attending their student's soccer game with another sibling, and so with this language, if the other sibling attends a different school, this would exclude the ability of the parent to have the medical marijuana for that student. So I'm not sure how the committee feels about that, but this would limit it to the student who is a student at the school. And I think there was some concern about parents possibly possessing marijuana just in general when it's not related to the student who is certified to administer that marijuana. And then finally, the word recommended, there was some concern about using the word recommended. And I think to clarify that, just replacing the word recommended with the exact language that's included in the section about certification, and you have a copy of this, but I'll read it to you. It's section 2423B, and this is about how the medical provider certifies us as a person for the use of medical marijuana. And so the word recommended could be replaced with for whom medical marijuana, a student for whom a medical provider has provided a written certification for the medical use of marijuana pursuant to the Maine Medical Use of Marijuana Act. So it's recommended is kind of vague, but that would be the exact language that is required of a medical provider to give that certification.
I don't see that as the contrary piece to that. The only other thing I have is that we just mentioned about the storage. Oh yeah, it's deleted. I got it. Representative Doctor, you had a hand up. Representative Maker. What else? All set? Okay. Any other discussion? Does everybody understand what we're talking about? We have off the pass as amended, as the yellow amendment, and the additions that Mr. Nail has just put in there and clarified. So, Representative Cornfield and Representative Maker.
I would just like to say on mic that any news agencies that are listening, please fairly report this. We are not a committee that's recommending marijuana for school children.
Representative Maker.
Well, I wasn't thinking about the news part, but I do think that as difficult as this is going to be for most of us, probably all of us, to have this vote, I think we have to take care of the education for our children. And if this helps them get through the day, I think that we need to do it.
I would sort of echo those same my level of discomfort of the subject matter when we started out was pretty high, but try to work this down so that those students who will really suffer with seizure disorders are able to make through the day. So, Representative Stearns and Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My heartburn's still there, and I'm still out on the ledge.
Yep.
However,
I appreciate that.
it is not from the good people, and particularly the children that are afflicted by this at all in any way. What it is from is an experience over the years with some parents who are not parents, who are children, and who break laws and will use any method to get away with darn near anything. They come in the hallways of the schools and they push the envelope. I don't know if this bill would change anything. I think those folks are going to maybe bring some pot in with them anyway, but it's difficult for me to allow that, particularly with the federal regulation. There are just those pieces that make it tough. But, so anyway, that's where I weigh in on it. I guess my favorite color's plaid when it comes to this item where it sits right now. But we have come a long way with working this bill.
Senator Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just reflecting back on the first day we started working this, and just wanted to remind everyone in the committee again, we all are very aware that what we do this session can be worked next session. Nothing is in concrete. If there are issues that arise that we were unable to foresee, we can address those. We did that with the bullying legislation. That had to be not bullying, the restraint and seclusion bill. That required some very quick action, and we were able to deal with that. And we did that also around the teacher evaluation legislation this year as well. So I'm very confident that we can take action if necessary very quickly to address anything that we didn't anticipate. Having said that, I'm not sure we actually answered Mr. Now's question around the language in here about requiring the child to be a student at the school, and whether that could impact the sibling who may be in attendance at an event, and whether that parent is still allowed to attend to that child's need. And I just think we should answer that question for Mr. Now. I would say that we had the original language that was in the various amendments that came before us. It did not include a student in the school. It just simply referred to a child, a minor, and I think I would like us to consider going back to that, but I don't want to stop this bill if people aren't comfortable with it.
From my impression, I don't think there was a question from Mr. Neal. He was just pointing out that that's what that meant. But I'll let you speak for yourself, Mr. Neal.
No, that's right. I just wanted you to be aware that that was in there because it is a new addition to this amendment that hasn't been in the bill before.
And I kind of like it. Representative Hall?
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that at least what drove me towards wanting to accommodate this is the idea that we were making it impossible for certain students to get an education in our public schools. So for me, that restriction I think is specifically appropriate, and I'm comfortable with the way.
Okay.
Representative McClellan.
And I apologize, I walked in late and busy day here, so I apologize for that. And I kind of was going to say the same thing. And if I went back through the transcripts of all our discussions, I think about 3 times ago I said that this in no way construes that I support marijuana. Every other bill I'll be voting against, I'm sure. But I want to compliment the representative. I think she had a goal, and I think it was for good reasons. And she's bent, and we've worked it off pretty well. So. I'm just kind of stunned I'm voting yes on this, but don't tell my wife, but I know. She's out.
Representative Dodson and Representative Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that I will be voting, and I had planned on supporting this bill for a while because of one little boy named Calvin in Brunswick, and I think knowing when this goes through, it's going to make a huge difference in his life. So I just wanted to thank you, Representative Sanderson, for all your work on this. But I did want to follow up on what Representative Stearns said about certain childlike parents. And the way I read this, I hope any school that's tuning in knows that, unless the parent is carrying a prescription for their child, that they will persecute those children, not the children, the parents, to the full extent of the law. Man, I am tired.
Representative Stearns.
Poor Maddie.
Luckily, that's not in the form of a motion.
Representative Daughtry, you could persecute or prosecute. They're both types of Italian sausage anyway.
Okay, folks.
I do have one more piece that I'm not sure on, and that is age limit. If you have an 18-year-old senior, and taking that a next step, what if that 18-year-old has been emancipated? Are they allowed to carry product on their person for their own use during the day, for their own? It's something we probably ought to clear up, because high schools run into that often, as far as who's the guardian, who can sign off on an absence, those type of things. So it may be one that we'd want to touch up before we
Put a final vote on this. Representative Sanderson, do you have a?
Well, I guess my question would be, is an emancipated youth, are they their own authority, or is there another authority over them? And in this regard, for this particular bill right here, it's very clear that it said you cannot, unless the person is a parent, guardian, or designated caregiver as defined by. So I'm not sure that they actually would be.
An emancipated youth is their own authority.
So they wouldn't be the parent, guardian, or the designated caregiver.
Right. They're all three.
President Cornfield?
Yes, and the further problem is that those people who are 18 and emancipated have to surrender any drugs or, over-the-counter drugs to the school, but school's not going to take them in this case. So you're right that there is a problem.
Yeah, it's some qualifications to answer that question.
So the bill specifically, unless the person is a parent, guardian, or designated caregiver authorized to possess and administer to a minor child. So I think the explicit description of administration to a minor child eliminates the 18-year-old who may also be their own emancipated adult, because you have specifically to a minor child. Now, that does raise a question. There may be 18-year-olds who cannot access the medicine without a parent or guardian there. But I think that given your concerns about not having children possess their own medical marijuana on school grounds, I think for people, for the community that we're working with, I think that's an acceptable requirement. That the requirement that they had at 17 still applies at 18. But it says to a minor child.
Representative Howell?
I'm comfortable with the language as we discussed.
Okay. If something arises, we'll see this back here like a boomerang. So, any further discussion? We have a motion about to pass as amended with the amendment language that's in front of us. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay. Looks like we've all those favors except for Representative Stern, so we can get all into it. All those opposed? All right. One opposed, so the motion carries.